All right. During this next lecture here, we're going to kind of get into the types of crime, both violent and property crimes, touch a little bit on why people do crime that we know of, some trends recently in criminal offenses, and just like overall what they are. So there are many reasons that someone might, commit a criminal offense, any type of criminal offense. Those include things like economic factors, so like you might be desperate, right? You might feel like committing a theft is the only way that you can feed your family or your child or something. The desperation of it all. There are other situational factors, so perhaps you're in a situation that just kind of escalates quickly and it suddenly an argument becomes like a battery or an assault. There are social influences, so I'm sure some of you know the ways in which being around other people and having our peers around might make us feel pressured to engage in criminal behavior. So like an easy one to think of is underage drinking, right? Or drug use. Like, yeah, you probably aren't going to do that just by yourself. Most times, you're not just using those types of substances alone for most people. And then also kind of social influences might be things like where you are located neighborhood-wise, the types of people that you run around with, all that good stuff, right? Things that had you been in a different situation, had you been in a different social group, maybe the criminal behavior or offense or whatever would have never come up as an opportunity. And then finally, there are various psychological factors, so people's mental health issues, trauma kind of resurfacing, substance abuse, and other personality-related disorders can all contribute to one's propensity to commit crime, right? So these are just kind of big umbrella categories for the reasons that people commit crime, right? It's not exhaustive. There are so many reasons among individuals, and sometimes we don't know. Like, there is no real explanation. So all of that is important to know as we then kind of dive into how much crime is occurring and what the crimes really are. So over the last several years, both violent and property crime has been decreasing. As of 2024, so like the end of 2024, we see a violent crime overall decreasing by about 4.5%, and murder in particular decreasing by 14.9%, and robbery decreasing by about 8.9%. So those are murder, robbery, and other violent crimes, those rates for the year 2024 compared to the year 2023. Okay, so each year the FBI uses the Uniform Crime Report, the UCR, data to publish a basically summary report of the crimes that are happening across the country. That report I have linked or have shared with you all as kind of an additional supplementary reading. You don't have to read it. It's just interesting, I think, to see kind of the trends. So you have that if you are so inclined to just kind of flip through it. It's got some good images, graphics, and stuff. Yeah, so they published this. It just came out for last year. They just published the summary on August 5th of 2025. So it takes them a little while to compile everything and actually publish the report to the public, but it's available. Yeah. So overall, kind of the important thing to note is violent crimes are crimes that involve the force or threat of force against a victim. It is typically considered like the most serious type of offense in criminal law, and it has like, you know, very notable, significant societal impacts, right? In terms of the way that it affects both victims and people associated with the victims, people associated kind of tangentially in the community, things like that. So our first kind of big violent crime is all the different types of murder. So murder classifications depend on the intent of the offender, whether or not premeditation was involved, and also like different circumstances around the act of killing. So first-degree murder is premeditated. You're killing someone on purpose, right? You're thinking about it ahead of time. You're planning it. You're plotting. It can include felony murder. So like if you look over to the third block here, felony murder is when a murder is committed while you are committing another like violent or dangerous felony. So if you go and commit a robbery and you end up killing somebody during the commission of that robbery, you have committed a felony murder. It wouldn't be first degree necessarily because you weren't planning on murdering that person, but it is a felony murder. On the other hand, you could plan, right, to burn somebody's house down while they're in it. In that case, you would have both, like, it would be first degree felony murder because you planned on doing the murder and you also committed arson in the process, right? And then we have second degree murder, which is when you do kill somebody on purpose, but you weren't premeditated in the act. You weren't thinking about it, planning it ahead of time, but like when you did the action of killing, you meant to kill them. Okay. Something to note with the kind of felony murder, this came up in the in-person class, is like they were asking about capital murder, right? Because some states have the death penalty, not all states, but some. So in Texas, a capital murder is one where the murder itself is aggravated by certain factors. So for it to become a capital murder case in Texas, it could be any of the following. So first, it could be a murder against a police officer or firefighter who is on duty, like they're working and you target them, right? That's not necessarily a felony murder because maybe you weren't doing any other felonious behavior or felonious offenses at the time. You just went to kill them specifically. So that is a capital murder. Felony murders can be enhanced to capital murder charges. So like a felony murder qualifies for capital murder charge and potential like death penalty sentence, right? Other types of felony murder are murders that I think one of them was if you have murdered several people in the commission of like a spree, essentially a killing spree, or like a mass shooting. And on the fourth one, let me look. I know there's one more at least. Okay. Da, da, da. Oh, yes. If the victim is a child, sorry. Checking my notes. If the victim was a child under a certain age, and then others, like if you do a murder while you're trying to escape prison, things like that. Those all become capital cases, potentially. Those could be capital cases, just depending on how the case plays out, what type of plea bargaining is offered to the defendant, all of that kind of stuff, right? Like, but in theory, they could become capital cases. Okay, so then we have manslaughter. So there's voluntary manslaughter where you did mean to kill somebody. However, it was because you were provoked, right? Or kind of like in the heat, like a violent, like you saw red, right? So if you're in a fight and it's not necessarily self-defense because you both are just like enraged fighting each other and you happen to kill the person during the fight, that would potentially get you a voluntary manslaughter charge, right? The important note here is like for it to be voluntary manslaughter and not murder, there can be no cooling off period. So like it all has to happen all at once. You can't leave the fight, go get a gun, and come back and commit and like kill the person and be like, oh, it was manslaughter. It's the heat of the moment, right? Like you can't have a bunch of time that's elapsed between when the provocation happened and when the person is killed, the victim is killed. Okay? And then involuntary manslaughter is when you accidentally kill somebody, but it's because you were engaged in like criminal negligence, or you were committing some other like crime that wasn't a felony. So this could be, I mean, oftentimes you see it with like vehicular manslaughter. I think one of the easiest or most obvious is like you hit, like a drunk driver hits somebody and the person they hit dies, right? They didn't mean to kill anybody, but they were being reckless, they were intoxicated, they were driving when they should not have been. Similarly, if you are driving 110 and flip your car and your passenger dies, you might get out of the hospital and be facing involuntary manslaughter charges as well, because you unintentionally killed somebody because of your recklessness and your criminal negligence, right? So that is one way of kind of remembering that, right? Like the involuntary manslaughter is, I didn't mean to kill anybody. I didn't necessarily think my behavior would result in death to another person. Didn't plan for that, but it did. And then voluntary manslaughter is, yeah, I was willing to fight that person to the death, and I did, right? Like I killed them, it happened, and it wasn't necessarily an accident. But it lacks the premeditation of like murder. Yeah. Then we have our other kind of violent crimes, so assault and battery. Assault is the attempt or threat to commit battery. Battery is the unlawful physical contact against somebody that causes them harm. It becomes aggravated when you've inflicted serious bodily injury or you've used a weapon and/or. So if I pull a gun on you and point, like if somebody points a gun on you, that is an assault. Like it is unprovoked, there's no reason, like pointing a firearm at you is the threat of battery with a firearm, right? That is an assault. Like, that is how that works. And then we have like the various types of assault and battery that can occur in domestic situations, right? And then which encompasses all of domestic violence there at the end, which we'll get to. And then robbery. So if you don't take anything else away from this class, I want you to remember that people get robbed. Places do not. People are the victims in a robbery, not your house, not a bank. The bank teller was robbed. The bank was stolen from. The bank as an entity. Your house didn't get robbed. Your house got burgled. And they stole from you while they were burglarizing your house. Like they committed a theft upon entering your home, if you were not there, right? People get robbed. Places are burgled. Or thefts are committed at the place. There's a difference, right? Because robbery requires this like force or threat of force or physical harm. My house is an inanimate object. It doesn't feel threat, right? It doesn't feel threatened. It can't feel pain or harm inflicted upon it. So it cannot be robbed. It has to involve like an immediate confrontation. So like they need to be engaging with you directly. Okay. Obviously an armed robbery includes when the person committing the robbery has a weapon. And a strong arm robbery is when they use physical force against you, whatever type they choose to use, right? So somebody might just regular rob you where they're not necessarily armed, but they're threatening you, and so you hand over whatever it is they're demanding, right? Or you feel like, you know, it's not worth risking it, and maybe they don't have to threaten you that much. Maybe they just say, give me all your blah blah blah, and you're like, yeah, forget that, like no property is worth my life. I don't know what this person could have. You hand it over. That's a regular robbery. If they have a weapon, you know they have a weapon. You've been threatened with the weapon in some capacity, whether it's they just flashed it at you, right, in their waistband, or they're holding it, but maybe not necessarily like coming at you with it yet. Like that's an armed robbery. And then a strong arm robbery would be like if they apply physical force to you as a person. So like they throw you down, throw you against a wall, punch you in the gut, right? All of those things. Then we have domestic violence. So this can include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. It occurs particularly within intimate partner relationships. There's typically a pattern of coercive control that occurs, and in some places we see like specialized courts and various like protections in place for these types of instances. In Texas, there are mandatory arrest law, or maybe it might be the city of Austin, where I know for sure APD's policy is if they respond to a domestic violence instance or offense, they have to make an arrest. It's not up to the victim. They don't get to say, no, I don't want you to take him to jail. Well, they can say that, but the cops are going to say, that's too bad per policy. I have to make an arrest here for this, right? So that's like one of the protections that are kind of in place to ideally like separate those people till things cool off a little bit. Especially if the person who is being abused is not in a place where like they can get out of that situation immediately. Finally, we have sex offenses. So there are various types of like forcible sex crimes. So these are any sexual acts committed against the victim's will through force, the threat of force, or when the victim is not capable to consent because of their age, their mental capacity, or they're just intoxicated. There are different types of legal categorizations for sexual offenses. So we have like forcible rape, sexual assault with objects, forcible sodomy, and just general kind of like sexual abuse. Statutory rape involves consent issues with minors regardless of force. So like you might have a 16-year-old who thinks they're in love and is in a relationship with a 25-year-old. Well, that 16-year-old is not legally able to consent to sexual contact with that adult person, right? So that then becomes statutory rape. It doesn't matter if they thought they were a consenting party. They don't feel like they're necessarily the victim of a predator. It's still statutory rape because like they are not legally able to consent to that contact. Kind of socially, we see a misrepresentation oftentimes of like how many of these types of offenses are being reported. Sex offenses are historically very underreported because there's all types of like stigma associated with being a victim of a sex offense. There's the trauma of it all, right? Like that is one of the most intimate and horrific types of things that can happen to somebody. And not only do they have to report it and hope that someone believes them, they then will have to undergo questioning both by the police and then potentially like on the stand at a trial, right? Like, and every single time you are opening the door to being re-traumatized by having to share what happened to you, right? So, in the last like decade or so, we had the Me Too movement, which did increase awareness and reporting. And we've seen kind of this push for specialized victim services and trauma-informed approaches to handle these types of crimes, right? So rather than just having untrained, like, not overall untrained cops, but untrained in the art of talking to people about these like very sensitive issues, instead of having, you know, the most direct person you know asking what you were doing, what you were wearing, how you were behaving, what happened to you. Now then we have instead people who are better equipped to handle that. Moving along to our property crimes. So those are our big, like violent crimes, the most notable types of violent crimes. And then we can kind of transition here into property crimes. So these are any crimes that interfere with somebody's property rights without direct confrontation. So like they're not approaching the person or you directly, they're not interacting with you directly to do the crime. These types of crimes include theft, committing things that cause damage to other people's property or places that they own, whatever, and then unauthorized or unlawful entry into somebody's property. So theft or larceny occurs when somebody takes your property without permission and with the intent to deprive the owner of said property. So they're taking it and they know you're going to miss it and they don't care because it's theirs now, right? They've taken it. We have burglary, which is the unlawful entry into a structure with the intent to commit crime inside typically the crime being committed inside is theft, right? So somebody burgles a house to take things from the house. In some cases, people burglar like abandoned homes or condemned homes to vandalize them, right? Like that happens too, but burglary is typically committed with the intent to do another crime on the inside. So that's just like the breaking in part, entering. And then vandalism, which is when you destroy or damage somebody's property without their consent to do that. Property crime trends last year also lower than the year prior, and they're at their lowest levels since the 1960s, right? Which is pretty crazy, like really interesting. Not entirely clear what might be driving those trends. I will have to do some more digging to see if anybody has kind of hypothesized about that, and I'll let you guys know. But overall, we see across this chart decreasing in burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and vandalism, with motor vehicle theft seeing that really big one-year drop and kind of going back to pre-pandemic or pre-2020 levels nationwide.